These are tens of thousands of men who call themselves scrappers, and they are systematically dismantling what is left of Motor City, Detroit, one copper wire at a time. In America's Rust Belt, this former arsenal of democracy has lost 65% of its population since 1950, and these urban survivors have turned post-industrial collapse into a survival economy that is costing the city millions while highlighting our nation's most vivid symbol of deindustrialization. Detroit's population peaked at 1.85 million in 1950, making it the fourth largest city in America. Today, barely 640,000 people remain. That's not just numbers on a census report. That's 1.2 million people who packed up and left entire neighborhoods, schools, factories, and infrastructure. What they left behind, from the towering Packard automotive plant ruins to the recently renovated Michigan Central Station, became the perfect hunting ground for a new kind of urban survivor. The scrapper economy emerged from this perfect storm of abandonment and rising metal prices. When copper jumped from 72 cents per pound in 2003 to over $3 by 2008, suddenly every abandoned building became a potential gold mine. With copper now hitting record highs of $5.37 per pound in 2025, these men, and they are overwhelmingly men, found themselves in a bizarre cycle, where their survival depends almost entirely on Detroit's continued decay. Walk through Detroit today and you'll see their handiwork everywhere. Manhole covers are missing from streets, leaving gaping holes that drivers navigate around. Air conditioning units are stripped from buildings in broad daylight. Even a statue of crucified Christ was pulled right off a church wall for its metal content. One scrapper stole a manhole cover within direct view of the FBI building downtown. At a Detroit Edison substation that was still operational, scrappers stripped virtually everything of value while the electricity was still running. The audacity is matched only by the desperate efficiency. Tom Faze, president of the Springdale Woodmere Block Club, puts it simply, if they see a house is unoccupied, within 2 weeks it is stripped. In his neighborhood, scrappers pulled down 2 telephone poles with a pickup truck just to get at the transformers, robbing residents of electric and phone service. This happened in broad daylight next to an elementary school. But who are these scrappers? They are not the stereotypical junkies you might imagine. They are workers, not beggars, who simply cannot afford to be alcoholics or drug addicts. Their work demands too much focus and energy. They work constantly, barehanded, with makeshift tools, pushing loaded shopping carts for miles to the nearest buyer. They earn just enough cash to survive each day, but never enough to escape their routine. Most live without heat, electricity, running water, or any sense of security. There is no time for rest and relaxation, no day off, especially during Detroit's brutal winters. They live day to day, staying positive because depression would be a luxury they cannot afford. Often solitary figures, they have found ways to enter and remove metal from the majority of vacant homes and industries, using little more than orphaned shopping carts to transport their spoils. The mathematics of their survival are brutal. One documented scrapper collected enough metal to earn $138 in a single day, making about $700 for the week, good money by scrapping standards. High-quality copper wire, after the plastic coating is burned off, can fetch up to 75 cents per pound from legitimate buyers. More often, scrappers get the lower price for mixed-quality metal, about 10 cents less per pound. And if they are desperate, or working outside business hours, they will settle for half price from midnight middlemen. The burning happens in vacant lots, particularly east of the old Fisher Body plant. Scrappers ignite shopping carts full of cable, remove the smoldering copper cores, and haul the metal to scrapyards in other carts. The burnt landscape becomes part of Detroit's post-apocalyptic aesthetic, but for scrappers, it is just another workday. They come back to fire-damaged buildings because heat loosens walls and exposes burnt copper wires that are easier to harvest. When legitimate scrapyards close or become too scrutinizing, there is always the underground market. Unlicensed brokers operate out of basements and backyards, using scales in residential settings. They are open 24 hours, never ask where the metal came from, and pay about half what licensed dealers offer. Some drug dealers will even accept scrap metal as payment, creating an alternative currency in Detroit's shadow economy. The scale of this underground industry is staggering. Detroit's city-owned electrical grid loses up to $1 million annually to copper theft. Mayor Mike Duggan reports seeing at least 5,000 cases yearly of copper theft from air conditioning units alone. The total damage from scrap metal theft cost Detroit and Detroit public schools well over $25,000 every single day. These are not small-time operations. In one documented case, thieves caused between $500,000 and $750,000 in damage to extract just $5,000 worth of scrap copper. The wind farm industry in one Michigan county lost about $60,000 in 1 week to scrap metal theft. Nationally, the Department of Energy estimates copper theft has become a billion-dollar annual nightmare. The most dramatic example came on August 11, 2014, when massive flooding left communities across Metro Detroit underwater for days. Officials blamed scrappers who had stolen copper piping from numerous pumping stations, crippling the region's flood control infrastructure. The total damage reached $1.08 billion, affecting over 100,000 homes across 3 counties. All because scrappers had systematically harvested copper from critical infrastructure. 3 months later, another scrapper removing copper piping from an abandoned home caused a gas explosion that destroyed 12 houses in one blast. These weren't accidents. They were the inevitable result of desperate people with improvised tools working in damaged buildings they didn't understand. Detroit's scrappers have earned a national reputation among security experts for unusual organization and aggressiveness. Virtually everyone who lives in Detroit has either been victimized by scrappers or knows someone who has. The Lee Plaza, a 15-story Art Deco apartment building from 1929, had its entire steep copper roof stripped over 3 months, likely in broad daylight. Scrappers accessed the roof by climbing 16 flights of stairs in total darkness through a hole in a cinder block wall. In the Brightmoor neighborhood, metal thieves have systematically stripped abandoned buildings of anything valuable, leaving behind gutted shells. Copper pipes, electrical wiring, aluminum siding, even brass doorknobs have been harvested and sold. The neighborhood has become a case study in how scrapping accelerates urban decay beyond the point of recovery. This systematic dismantling echoes the broader pattern seen throughout Detroit's east side, where entire blocks resemble scenes from Devil's Night, the annual pre-Halloween arson phenomenon that historically plagued the city. The legal system struggles to address this economy effectively. Michigan passed Public Act 99 in 2014, requiring scrap metal facilities to follow strict payment restrictions for copper wire, piping, air conditioning components, and catalytic converters. All sellers must provide identification, thumbprints, and addresses for where the metal originated. For sales over $25, payment must be mailed to the address on the seller's ID rather than provided as immediate cash. But enforcement remains spotty. Mayor Duggan noted that during a surprise police inspection of one scrapyard, officers found a bin of stolen catalytic converters directly beneath the theft notice sign on the wall. The most controversial aspect of the reform effort has been eliminating cash transactions entirely. The biggest attraction of scrap metal theft in Michigan has always been walking in with material and walking out with immediate cash. The penalties can be severe for those caught. Stealing over $20,000 worth of scrap metal carries a maximum 10-year prison sentence and fines up to $15,000 or 3 times the value of the stolen metal, whichever is higher. But prosecution requires catching scrappers in the act and proving the metal was stolen, which is difficult when so much infrastructure sits abandoned. The industry fights back through trade organizations like the Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries, which formed groups to work with law enforcement and establish national theft reporting systems. But critics argue the legitimate scrap industry benefits from loose regulations that make it easier to process stolen material. Andy Arena, director of the Detroit Crime Commission, believes scrap dealers have inserted influence in legislation and are fighting hard to make sure their ability to deal in stolen property is not changed. The human cost extends beyond property damage. Chad Audi, president of Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries, observes that many scrappers are no longer in business, and some have become absolutely homeless because they can no longer afford even the one-room apartments they used to rent. The scrapper economy both creates and feeds on homelessness, trapping people in cycles where stealing copper becomes their only viable income source. Take Robert Jones Jr., a homeless man surviving on scrap metal he finds in Detroit. When he was arrested and charged with theft, his defense revealed a life with no other viable options. The reality is that legitimate employment often requires addresses, transportation, and documentation that homeless scrappers simply do not have. Scrapping offers immediate cash for immediate survival, no questions asked. The buyer-seller relationship reveals the exploitative nature of this economy. Scrap yards entice desperate people with cash for scrap signs, knowing that homeless or impoverished scrappers will take whatever price is offered. These yards then sell to larger companies, often shipping metal overseas. The actual workers who do the dangerous extraction remain cheap, untraceable labor at the bottom of the supply chain. Detroit's response has evolved over time. Under Mayor Duggan's leadership, the city launched an aggressive blight removal campaign funded through the federal Hardest Hit Fund that reduced abandoned homes from 47,000 to under 1,000. The demolition effort involved $265 million in federal funding and $250 million from voter-approved bonds. Since 2020, Detroit has actually sold more vacant houses than it has demolished, a significant tipping point that removes scrapping targets from the landscape. But critics argue this approach treats symptoms rather than causes. As long as tax foreclosure and auction processes continue creating new abandoned properties, blight removal becomes an expensive treadmill. Detroit City Council President Mary Sheffield notes that when homes are foreclosed upon, typically within a week or two of being vacant, they are stripped and become open to the elements. The economic incentives driving scrapping have only intensified. Copper prices hit record levels in 2024 and 2025, reaching as high as $5.37 per pound as global demand from electric vehicles, renewable energy infrastructure, and grid modernization collides with mining operations that can't expand fast enough. The energy transition alone requires 4 times more copper than traditional fossil fuel systems. Analysts, including Goldman Sachs, believe copper prices could reach $6 to $7 per pound. For Detroit's scrappers, these price increases represent both opportunity and increased competition. What sold for $2.80 per pound 2 years ago now commands significantly higher prices, and market analysts expect these elevated levels to persist through 2026 and beyond. Higher prices mean the same amount of dangerous, illegal work yields more survival money, but also attracts more people to the trade. There are signs of change beyond demolition programs. The 2020 census showed Detroit's population beginning to grow for the second consecutive year, marking the first reversal of decline since 1950. New residents mean occupied buildings, which removes scrapping targets while providing legitimate economic activity. Artists and activists like those behind the Heidelberg Project have transformed some blighted areas into powerful statements about urban decay and renewal, creating alternative narratives around Detroit's abandoned spaces. The transformation is not complete, and may never be. Detroit still contains thousands of abandoned structures, miles of vacant land, and infrastructure that remains vulnerable to harvesting. The scrapper economy has become so embedded in the city's survival ecosystem that eliminating it entirely would require addressing poverty, homelessness, and the lack of legitimate employment opportunities that drive people to this work. What makes Detroit's scrapper economy so compelling as a subject is how it perfectly embodies America's post-industrial contradictions. These are people working incredibly hard, showing remarkable resourcefulness and determination to survive by literally dismantling the infrastructure their grandparents built. They are not lazy or criminal by nature. They are responding rationally to economic circumstances that offer few alternatives. The scrapper represents the perfect antihero of post-industrial America, creeping through shadows and sifting through wreckage, trying to turn a profit from decay any way possible. In Detroit, they have created a parallel economy that operates entirely outside traditional systems, with its own supply chains, pricing structures, and survival networks. As Detroit continues its long, slow recovery, the scrapper economy will likely persist in some form. Rising metal prices ensure continued incentives, while remaining blight provides raw materials. The question is not whether scrapping will disappear entirely, it is whether Detroit can create enough legitimate opportunities so that fewer people need to survive by harvesting their own city's remains. Until then, the scrappers will continue their Sisyphean routine, pushing loaded carts through empty neighborhoods, turning urban decay into daily bread, one copper wire at a time.